1933. Adolf Hitler has taken power and begins implementing his plans for a greater Germany. Much of the focus is set on the Jewish population and, in fear of what may become of them, scientists such as Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard flee Europe for the United States. 1 year before the war begins, physicists prove that nuclear fission is possible. Nuclear fission is the process by which a particle crashes into a larger particle, therefore destabilizing the atom and splitting it into two nuclei, and if the substance is fissile, this chain reaction will continue. The energy potential is enough to level cities. Realizing the potential of Germany gaining a so-called nuclear bomb, the Einstein-Szilard letter is sent directly to FDR imploring the United States to start its own nuclear program and to snatch up all fissile material in the world. After some deliberation, FDR approves a government-funded organization on nuclear capabilities, especially uranium-235, the most abundant fissile material in the world, and plutonium, a recently discovered element. Up to this point, funding had been limited, but on December 7, 1941, the United States is drawn into the Second World War with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. As the war effort increases, so does the nuclear effort, with funding and resources building up over time, and soon the United States nuclear program is the best in the world, despite being formed just a few years before.
Hello. Despite being the most common fissile material on the planet, uranium-235 makes up less than 1% of all uranium, meaning that thousands of tons of uranium will be needed to produce mere pounds of uranium-235, needing a more effective method of extraction focus and put on 3 isolation methods.
Electromagnetic separation, a form of mass spectrometry, which in itself is the ionization of particles and their separation, where charged particles bounce off a magnetic field and the strength of the deflection is dependent on the weight of the particle. This process is extremely costly but yields some of the highest purity. Gaseous diffusion, where uranium hexafluoride is forced through a semi-permeable membrane that essentially catches the longer particles and leave behind the smaller ones, such as uranium-235. And thermal diffusion, where particles are heated up and react to the temperatures depending on what they are.
Beyond uranium-235 production is plutonium production, which is done by using a reactor and bombarding stable uranium-238 with neutrons, forcing it to decay and eventually produce plutonium. Quite straightforward if I do say so myself. In addition to the extraction of fissile materials, separate branches begin to focus on the development of 2 types of nuclear reactors. Heavy water reactors, which use a form of water that contains deuterium, which is essentially hydrogen with a neutron particle that behaves as a moderator and makes controlled nuclear reactions possible. The second being graphite-mediated nuclear reactors, which use graphite rods to achieve the same result of executing a controlled nuclear reaction. The first nuclear reactor was Chicago Pile 1, which used graphite rods to execute a controlled reaction and was under the jurisdiction of Enrico Fermi. Despite being the best in the world, the Manhattan Project was set back with problems such as limited funding, poor leadership, and lack of uranium. This changed when leadership was reorganized to focus on a more aggressive strategy, with the project soon receiving the highest priority of military funds. With leadership and money back on track, the need still existed for more uranium, which, up until this point, had come from Canada. Working a deal out with Churchill, FDR signed the Quebec Agreement, which made the U.S. and Britain equal partners in the quest for a nuclear weapon. Having the British on board, uranium was sent en masse from the Belgian Congo, and, in conjunction with uranium mining in Colorado, any resource concerns were set aside. Finally, the time had come to develop the weapon itself. The first weapon, codenamed Thin Man, used a gun-type reaction, wherein a mass of fissile material is shot through a barrel and encapsulates another fissile material, thus causing the needed energy to begin the reaction. However, using plutonium, the presence of 2 isotopes would have inevitably caused a premature detonation, but the gun-type idea was not lost. Switching out the plutonium for uranium-235, the little boy was designed and was put into production. The third design was dubbed Fat Man, an implosion-type device where a core of plutonium is compressed by controlled explosions and, in conjunction with a neutron mediator, causes a nuclear reaction. However, the test of an actual explosion itself had not been done, and so it was time. Trinity was the code name for the testing of a nuclear device similar to Fat Man. This device was called the Gadget. Testing it at the Los Alamos facility, the fate of the Manhattan Project rested on this test to serve as vindication for the millions of dollars spent on this effort. The Gadget was raised onto a tower where it was to be detonated. No one knew what was going to happen, with some expecting a fizzle, while others estimated an explosive blast as large as 18 kilotons. On July 16th, at 5:29, 21 seconds past the minute, the Trinity device was detonated. 20 kilotons of explosive force was released and the effort of the Manhattan Project was justified. Now, it was time to use the device in combat. 2 bombs were constructed for immediate use against Japan. Using a specially prepared bomber, the first bomb, Little Boy, was dropped on the city of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and within seconds, 70% of the city was decimated, with an estimated 70,000 civilians incinerated immediately. 3 days later, the second bomb, Fat Man, was dropped on the city of Nagasaki, and despite landing in the mountains, 35,000 civilians were instantly killed, and the northern part of the city destroyed. For better or worse, the Manhattan Project was a success, with the United States becoming the world's first nuclear power. 6 days after the bombing of Nagasaki, Japan surrendered, thus ending the Second World War.